Welcome back to Stamp Us, your destination for fascinating American stamp history, rare stamps, and surprising collector values. If you love discovering the stories hidden behind old United States stamps, you are in the right place. In today's video, we are taking a close look at a very interesting 1942 United States 10-cent war savings stamp featuring the famous Minuteman design. This small red stamp may look ordinary at first, but it represents an important moment in American history and the massive wartime savings effort during World War II. So stay with us until the end, because we are going to look at this stamp's history, identify its important features, discuss its collector value, and explain what you should check if you have one of these stamps in your own collection. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Stamp Us and turn on notifications, because you never know when an old stamp hiding in a collection could turn out to be something truly interesting. Now, let's take a closer look at this remarkable American stamp. Have you ever looked at an old American stamp and wondered if it could be worth more than its tiny original price? Today on Stamp Us, we are taking a close look at a fascinating piece of American history, the 1942 United States 10-cent war savings stamp featuring the famous Minuteman. At first glance, this little red stamp may look simple, but it represents an important chapter in American history and the massive savings campaign that helped support the United States during World War II. The stamp shown here is a 10-cent war savings stamp from the 1942 series. The design is immediately recognizable because of the Minuteman standing proudly in the center. On the left side are the words United States, while the right side reads War Savings. The denomination, 10 cents, appears prominently in both lower corners. Above the Minuteman is the year 1942, which is one of the most important clues for identifying this particular issue. Unlike an ordinary postage stamp, this was not primarily created to pay for mailing a letter. It was part of the United States Treasury's wartime savings program. During World War II, Americans were encouraged to save small amounts of money and contribute toward the nation's financial effort. War savings stamps made it possible for ordinary people, including families and young Americans, to participate with relatively small purchases. The Minuteman image was an especially powerful choice. The Minuteman represented the American citizen ready to defend the country, connecting the Revolutionary War era with the enormous national effort taking place during World War II. The design, therefore, wasn't just decorative. It carried a patriotic message about saving, sacrifice, and supporting the United States. The 10-cent denomination was one of several values in the 1942 war savings stamp series. The series included 10-cent, 25-cent, 50-cent, $1, and $5 denominations. According to historical research from the Smithsonian-affiliated National Postal Museum, the 10-cent stamp was printed in rose red and was cataloged as Scott WS7. A Carmine rose shade, Scott WS7A, is also recognized. The 10-cent stamp was issued on October 29, 1942. It was produced on unwatermarked paper and normally has perforations measuring 11 by 10 and 1/2. There were also booklet and coil varieties, which means that two stamps that look almost identical at first glance can sometimes be different catalog varieties. This is one reason serious collectors examine the perforations, printing characteristics, gum, paper, and overall condition very carefully. Now let's talk about the question almost every collector wants answered. What is this stamp worth today? The first thing you need to understand is that the 10-cent denomination printed on the stamp is not the same thing as its modern collector value. This was a savings stamp rather than a normal postage stamp, and its historical purpose was different from that of a regular U.S. postage issue. Today, ordinary examples can often be relatively inexpensive, while better quality examples, varieties, booklet panes, plate blocks, and unusual multiples can be more desirable to collectors. For example, a recent online sale for a later 10-cent Minuteman savings stamp, Scott S1, showed an example selling for around $1.35. That is a different issue from the 1942 war savings stamp shown here, so it should not be used as a direct valuation for this stamp. It does, however, demonstrate an important point. Simply having an old-looking Minuteman stamp does not automatically make it worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. For the stamp shown in this video, the exact value depends heavily on identification and condition. A common used example with faults, heavy cancellation, creases, thins, or damaged perforations may have only modest collector value. A clean example with original gum, excellent centering, strong color, intact perforations, and no faults can be much more desirable. Specialized varieties can also bring different prices. Collectors should pay particular attention to the perforations. The standard 10-cent war savings stamp was perforated 11 by 10 and 1/2, while the coil version had different perforation characteristics. The National Postal Museum's research identifies the 1942 10-cent stamp as WS7 and the later coil as WS12. Another interesting detail is that the 10-cent value was also produced in booklet panes. The booklet version is cataloged as WS7B. These booklet panes contain 10 stamps, and some examples have special electric eye markings. Such features can make a major difference when a collector is trying to determine exactly which variety they own. This is why you should never judge an old stamp only by its age. Age is just one factor. Condition, rarity, variety, printing method, centering, gum, perforations, provenance, and collector demand can all influence the market value. Two stamps that look almost identical may sell for very different amounts because one contains a collectible variety or has significantly better condition, and there is another important warning for anyone who finds an old stamp collection. Never clean, wash, press, trim, regum, or otherwise alter a potentially collectible stamp just to make it look better. Amateur repairs can destroy collector value. If you think you have an unusual variety or a particularly well-preserved example, professional identification and authentication may be worthwhile before attempting anything. The history behind this stamp is perhaps even more interesting than its price. During World War II, the United States used savings stamps as a way to encourage Americans to save and participate in the war financing effort. These stamps gave people a simple way to contribute small amounts and eventually use accumulated savings toward government savings bonds. Historical sources explain that the wartime war savings stamps were different from the earlier World War I savings certificates and did not function in exactly the same way. So when you look at this small red 10-cent stamp, you're not simply looking at an old piece of paper. You're looking at a miniature artifact from the World War II home front. The Minuteman, the 1940 to date, the words United States and War Savings, and the 10-cent denomination all tell part of the story. If you have one of these stamps in your collection, don't immediately assume that it is either worthless or extremely valuable. Instead, examine it carefully. Look at the date, denomination, color, perforations, centering, gum, cancellation, and overall condition. Then compare the stamp with the correct catalog listing and, if necessary, ask an experienced stamp dealer or professional expert for an evaluation. And remember, the stamp shown in this video should not be valued solely from its printed 10-cent denomination. The collectible market value can be different, and an accurate appraisal requires examination of the actual physical stamp. Online asking prices are also not the same as confirmed auction results. Next up, we are taking a close look at a beautiful 50-cent United States War Savings stamp from the World War II era, featuring the famous American Minuteman. This small blue stamp may look simple, but behind this design is an important story about patriotism, saving money, and America's effort during World War II. So stay with us until the end, because we are going to look at the history of this stamp, what makes it interesting to collectors, and what factors can determine its value today. The stamp shown here is a 50-cent War Savings stamp from the 1942 issue. It features the Minuteman standing proudly in the center, holding his rifle, with the words United States running vertically on the left and War Savings running vertically on the right. The denomination, 50 cents, is clearly displayed in both lower corners. The blue or deep ultramarine color gives the stamp a very distinctive appearance, making it one of the most recognizable designs from America's World War II savings program. This stamp is identified in specialized stamp catalogs as Scott WS9. The 1942 War Savings stamp series included 5 denominations: 10 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents, $1, and $5. All 5 denominations used the Minuteman design. Historical records show that these stamps were created as part of a nationwide savings program connected with the purchase of United States War Savings bonds. But there is something very important to understand about this stamp. It was not an ordinary postage stamp designed primarily for mailing letters. These War Savings stamps were created as a way for ordinary Americans to save smaller amounts of money toward the purchase of larger war savings bonds. People could purchase stamps in smaller denominations and placed them into special savings books. Once enough stamps had been collected, the accumulated amount could be used toward a war savings bond. The 50-cent denomination was especially useful because it allowed people to participate in the savings program without needing to spend a large amount of money at one time. A collection of these small stamps could gradually build into a much larger amount. The idea was simple: save a little at a time, fill the booklet, and eventually use the accumulated savings toward a government bond. The Minuteman design also carries an important patriotic message. The Minuteman represents the American citizen ready to defend the country. Using this image during World War II connected the sacrifices of America's revolutionary generation with the sacrifices being made by Americans in the 1940s. The stamp was therefore more than just a financial instrument. It was also part of the patriotic campaign encouraging citizens to support the nation during wartime. The blue color of this particular 50-cent stamp is another identifying feature. Specialized references describe WS9 as a 50-cent stamp in deep ultramarine. This is useful for collectors because the denomination, color, design, and wording together help distinguish the stamp from other Minuteman savings stamps issued later. Now comes the question that many collectors want to know: how much could this old 50-cent stamp be worth today? The answer is not simply 50 cents, and it is also not automatically hundreds or thousands of dollars. The printed denomination tells us what the stamp represented when it was issued, but today's collector value depends on several factors. Condition is one of the most important factors. A stamp with heavy creases, tears, missing perforations, stains, thins, or other damage can be worth much less than a clean, well-preserved example. Collectors also examine the gum on the back. Original gum that has been preserved well can be important for unused stamps. Centering is another factor. A stamp with balanced margins and intact perforations generally looks much better than an example that is badly centered or damaged around the edges. Another important consideration is whether the stamp is a normal single or part of a collectible multiple, booklet pane, plate block, or another specialized format. The 1942 War Savings Stamp series had different forms and production varieties, and these details can make a difference to specialized collectors, and this is why you should never judge an old stamp only by its age. An old stamp is not automatically a rare stamp. Rarity, condition, demand, variety, and provenance all matter. A common stamp in poor condition may have only modest value, while a scarce variety or exceptional quality example may attract much greater interest. The historical story behind these stamps is what makes them particularly fascinating. During World War II, the United States needed enormous amounts of money to support the war effort. Americans were encouraged to purchase war bonds and savings stamps as a way of helping finance the country. War savings stamps provided an affordable method for people who could not immediately purchase larger bonds. The program also became part of everyday American life. Children, families, workers, and communities could participate by purchasing stamps and filling savings books. This made the war financing effort feel personal, instead of being something that only wealthy Americans could participate in. Saving through stamps allowed people to contribute in small amounts. Imagine receiving this little 50-cent stamp during the 1940s. To someone at the time, it represented 50 cents of savings. But today, it can represent something completely different, a physical connection to the American home front during World War II. If you have this stamp in your collection, I recommend taking a close look at the front and back before deciding what it is worth. Check the color, perforations, centering, gum, cancellation, paper, and overall condition. Also check whether it is a single stamp or part of a larger piece or booklet. Those details can help determine exactly what you have. One important warning for collectors is never to clean, trim, press, regum, or otherwise alter an old stamp in an attempt to improve its appearance. Amateur repairs can actually reduce collector value. If you believe your stamp may be an unusual variety or an especially valuable example, professional evaluation is a much safer approach. Another important point is that online asking prices should not automatically be treated as market values. A seller can ask almost any price for an old stamp, but that does not mean someone will actually pay that amount. Confirmed sales, specialized catalogs, condition, and expert opinions provide much stronger evidence when determining a realistic collector value. So, is this 50-cent War savings stamp worth looking at? Absolutely. Even if your individual example is not extremely valuable financially, it is still an authentic piece of American history from the World War II era. The Minuteman design, the 50-cent denomination, and the war savings inscription tell the story of a time when millions of Americans were encouraged to save and support the country, and that is what makes stamp collecting so fascinating. Sometimes the real treasure is not simply the price tag. It is the history contained in a tiny piece of paper. A stamp like this can connect us to a completely different generation and help us understand how ordinary Americans participated in one of the most important periods in American history. If you have a 50-cent Minuteman war savings stamp like this one, take a closer look before putting it away. Check the details, compare it with the correct catalog information, and preserve it carefully. You may have a fascinating piece of World War II history sitting right inside your collection. Next up, the stamp you are looking at is a $5 United States war savings stamp featuring the famous American Minuteman. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary old stamp, but this small piece of paper is connected to one of the most important periods in American history. So stay with us until the end, because we are going to look at what this stamp is, why it was created, when it was issued, what makes it different from similar Minuteman stamps, and what collectors may look for when determining its value today. The stamp shown here is the $5 war savings stamp from the 1942 series, cataloged as Scott WS 11. Its official catalog color is violet brown. The design features the famous Minuteman standing in the center with his rifle, while the words United States appear vertically on the left side and war savings appear vertically on the right. The denomination is displayed as $5 in the lower corners, and the words $5 appear across the bottom. Above the Minuteman is the year 1942, which can make this stamp particularly interesting to collectors because the actual $5 stamp was issued later, in 1945. That detail is extremely important. Although this stamp belongs to what is commonly called the 1942 War Savings Series, the $5 denomination was not actually issued in 1942. Historical research from the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum explains that the $5 war savings stamp, Scott WS 11, was issued sometime in 1945, with some historical sources placing its introduction around February of that year. The delay was related to an excess supply of an earlier $5 defense stamp and relatively low demand for the $5 denomination. So what exactly was the purpose of this unusual $5 stamp? Unlike ordinary U.S. postage stamps, war savings stamps were connected to the government's wartime savings program. Americans were encouraged to save money and support the nation's war financing efforts by purchasing savings stamps. These smaller savings amounts could be accumulated and used toward government savings securities. This program allowed ordinary Americans to participate in the financial effort supporting the United States during World War II. The Minuteman design was a powerful symbol for this campaign. The Minuteman represented an ordinary American citizen ready to defend the country. During World War II, this image connected the sacrifices of America's revolutionary generation with the sacrifices being made by Americans in the 1940 seconds. The message was simple but powerful. Ordinary citizens could contribute to the nation's effort. The $5 denomination also makes this stamp different from the smaller values in the series. The War Savings series included denominations of 10 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents, $1, and $5. The 10-cent stamp was rose red. The 25-cent stamp was dark blue-green. The 50-cent stamp was deep ultramarine. The $1 stamp was gray-black, and the $5 stamp was violet-brown. These details are extremely useful when identifying the stamps correctly. Now let's talk about the question that every collector wants answered. How much is this $5 stamp worth today? The answer is more complicated than simply looking at the $5 denomination printed on the stamp. The original denomination does not automatically represent its modern collector value. Today, the value depends heavily on condition, gum, centering, perforations, rarity, plate numbers, and whether the stamp is a single, a block, or another collectible format. For an ordinary single stamp, the market value can be considerably different from the value of a premium quality example or a specialized plate block. One current U.S. stamp price guide lists Scott WS 11 at around $500 for mint never hinged condition and around $400 for original gum hinged condition. while used examples are listed much lower. These are catalog-style figures, not guaranteed selling prices, and the actual market price of an individual stamp can vary significantly depending on condition and demand. There is also real auction evidence showing that high-quality WS11 material can sell for hundreds of dollars. For example, a 2008 Heritage auction sale recorded a $5 violet brown WS11 top margin plate block of 6, with original gum and never hinged condition, selling for $322. The lot was described as well-centered and very fine. More recently, a 2026 auction listing recorded another WS11 plate block of 6 selling for $350. These examples show why condition and format are so important when discussing value. But remember, you should not look at those auction results and assume that a single stamp like the one shown here is automatically worth hundreds of dollars. A plate block is a different collectible from a single stamp. The condition of your individual stamp also matters enormously. A damaged or heavily handled example may be worth far less than a perfectly preserved mint stamp. So what should you check if you have one of these $5 worth saving stamps? Start with the front. Look carefully at the color. The cataloged color for WS11 is violet brown. Then examine the perforations around all four sides. Make sure there are no missing teeth, tears, cuts, or serious damage. Next, look at the centering. A stamp with balanced margins and strong overall appearance is generally more desirable than one that is badly off-center. Then turn the stamp over and inspect the gum if the stamp is unused. Original gum can be very important for collectors. However, be extremely careful. Never try to clean the gum, add new gum, flatten the stamp, or repair damage yourself. Amateur repairs can seriously reduce collector value. Another important feature is the printing method. The $5 WS11 was printed by flat plate in sheets of 100 stamps, which were then divided into 4 panes of 25. Plate numbers appeared around the margins of the large sheet. This means that surviving plate blocks can be particularly interesting to specialized collectors. The plate numbers are another fascinating part of this stamp story. Historical research lists several plates used for WS11, including plate numbers in the 150,131 to 150,134 range and 150,291. There were also distinct top plate number formats, including examples with an F prefix. These details may not matter much to a casual collector, but they can be extremely important to specialists who study printing varieties and plate blocks. There is also a very important identification mistake that collectors should avoid. A later U.S. savings stamp uses a very similar Minuteman design and can look almost identical at first glance. The easiest difference is the wording on the right side. The World War II stamp says War Savings, while the later savings stamp issue says Savings Stamp. The later $5 stamp is cataloged as Scott S5 and is a different issue. That means if you find a $5 Minuteman stamp in an old album, don't identify it based only on the picture. Check the wording, the date, the color, and the other characteristics. Small differences can completely change the catalog number and potentially the collector value. The historical background makes this stamp especially interesting. Imagine being an American citizen in the early 1940s and seeing this Minuteman design as part of the nationwide effort to encourage savings. The United States was fighting a global war, and millions of people were being asked to contribute in different ways. Some served in the military, some worked in wartime industries, and others supported the effort by purchasing government savings products. This $5 stamp therefore represents more than its printed denomination. It represents an era when saving money and supporting the nation were closely connected. Today, collectors can hold one of these stamps and see a physical reminder of the American home front during World War II, and this is one of the reasons stamp collecting is so fascinating. A stamp does not have to be extremely rare or worth thousands of dollars to be historically important. Sometimes its greatest value is the story it tells. This $5 Minuteman War Savings stamp connects collectors directly to America's wartime history. If you have one of these stamps, preserve it carefully. Keep it away from moisture, excessive heat, sunlight, and anything that could damage the paper or gum. Avoid touching the stamp unnecessarily, especially if it is unused. If you believe you have a high-quality example, a rare plate block, or an unusual variety, consider having it examined by an experienced stamp dealer or professional expert before selling it. And remember, Online asking prices are not the same as confirmed market prices. Anyone can list an old stamp for a very high amount, but that does not mean buyers are willing to pay that price. Real auction results, reputable catalogs, condition, and specialist knowledge provide much better evidence when estimating a stamp's value. So, what do we have here? We have a $5 United States War Savings Stamp, Scott WS11, in violet brown, featuring the iconic Minuteman design. Although the series carries the 1940 to date, this $5 denomination was actually issued in 1945. It was part of America's World War II savings effort and was produced in sheets of 100 that were divided into panes of 25. High-quality examples and especially collectible plate blocks can attract significant collector interest. Next up, the stamp you are looking at is a beautiful 25-cent United States savings stamp featuring the iconic Minuteman, an American flag, and a patriotic red, white, and blue design. At first glance, this stamp may look very similar to the famous World War II war savings stamps we have discussed before, but there is an important difference that collectors need to know. So stay with us until the end, because we are going to identify this stamp, look at its history, explain what makes it different, and discuss the factors that can affect its collector value today. The stamp shown here is the 25-cent dark blue and carmine United States savings stamp, cataloged as Scott S6. Unlike the earlier World War II war savings stamps, this issue does not say war savings on the right side. Instead, the inscription reads savings stamp. The National Postal Museum identifies Scott S6 as a 25-cent stamp in dark blue and carmine, and records it as part of the later savings stamp series. This difference is extremely important. If you place this stamp next to the earlier 1940 to 25-cent war savings stamp, they can look surprisingly similar. Both feature the Minuteman, both have the 25-cent denomination, and both were connected with the American Savings Program. But the wording and design details allow collectors to distinguish them. The earlier World War II issue is part of the War Savings series, while this later stamp belongs to the Savings Stamp series. The Minuteman remains the central figure in this design. He stands proudly in front of an American flag, holding his rifle and representing the spirit of the American citizen. The flag behind him adds a strong patriotic element, while the words United States and Savings Stamp frame the design. The 25-cent denomination appears in both lower corners, making the value immediately visible. The Savings Stamp series carried the famous Minuteman design forward from the World War II period into the post-war years. According to research from the National Postal Museum, the later savings stamps used designs derived from the earlier war savings stamps. One of the easiest ways to distinguish the later series is that the 1940 to date was removed, and the wording war savings was replaced by savings stamp. The stamp shown here is identified as Scott S6 and is associated with the year 1958. It is listed as dark blue and carmine. The National Postal Museum records 3 plate numbers for S6, 166,921, 166,925, and 166,946. There is also a booklet pane variety cataloged as S6A. Now let's talk about the question collectors always want to know. How much could this 25-cent stamp be worth today? The first thing to understand is that the 25-cent denomination printed on the stamp is not necessarily its modern collector value. The stamp originally represented 25 cents, but today's collector market can place a different value on it depending on condition, variety, format, and demand. A normal single example may have relatively modest value, especially if it has been handled, damaged, or removed from an old booklet. However, specialized varieties can become much more interesting. For example, the S6 issue is known with a booklet pane variety cataloged as S6A. The National Postal Museum specifically lists S6A as the booklet type, and this is where stamp collecting becomes fascinating. A small difference in perforations, printing, margins, or format can sometimes make a major difference to a specialist. Collectors don't simply look at the picture on the front. They study how the stamp was printed, how it was perforated, whether it has original gum, and whether it belongs to a specific printing or booklet variety. There is also real auction evidence showing that unusual S6 material can attract much more attention than an ordinary single stamp. One documented auction listing featured a 1958 S6 horizontal block of 6 with a dramatic vertical perforation error. The perforations were shifted approximately 20% to the right, and the lot was described as very fine. The auction estimate was $150 to $200. That is an important lesson. The valuable part in an example like that is not simply the 25-cent denomination. It is the unusual production error and the fact that the stamps remain together in a collectible block. A normal single stamp should not automatically be valued at the same level as an error block. So if you own one of these 25-cent savings stamps, what should you look for? First, examine the color. This issue is cataloged as dark blue and carmine. Look at the blue areas around the frame and the red color of the flag and Minuteman design. Then examine the perforations carefully. Are they evenly positioned around the stamp? Are any teeth missing? Is the stamp cut unusually close to the design? Any dramatic perforation shift could potentially be interesting. Next, inspect the back of the stamp. If it is unused, check the gum. Original gum can be important to collectors. However, do not try to improve the gum yourself. Do not wash the stamp, press it, regum it, trim it, or use chemicals to make it look newer. Any amateur alteration can hurt the value. You should also check whether your stamp is a normal single or part of a larger group. Blocks, booklet panes, plate blocks, and major printing errors can be considerably more interesting to specialized collectors. The National Postal Museum records S6A as a booklet pane variety, so a stamp still attached to its original booklet format deserves closer examination. Another fascinating detail is that these later savings stamps continued the tradition of using stamps as a savings mechanism. During the earlier World War II period, Americans could purchase savings stamps and accumulate them in booklets toward the purchase of savings bonds. The stamps themselves were not ordinary postage stamps. Their purpose was connected with saving and participation in the government's bond program. This history gives the stamp much more meaning than its small size suggests. Imagine an American family in the post-war period using savings stamps as part of a government savings program. Each 25-cent stamp represented a small step toward a larger financial goal. Today, that same stamp can serve as a physical reminder of how the United States encouraged saving among ordinary citizens, and there is another reason collectors should pay attention to the exact wording. Many people see the Minuteman and immediately assume they have a 1942 savings stamp, but that can be a mistake. The National Postal Museum explains that the later savings stamp series looked very similar, but the 1942 date was removed and the words War Savings were changed to savings stamp. So before you search for a value online, identify the stamp correctly. Look at the inscription. Look for the date or the absence of a date. Check the denomination. Examine the color. Then compare the stamp with the appropriate catalog number. If your stamp is an ordinary single in average condition, don't assume it is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars just because it is old. On the other hand, don't ignore it either. A booklet variety, plate number, major perforation error, unusual printing, or exceptional quality example can be far more interesting than an ordinary copy. This is why professional stamp identification can be useful when an example looks unusual. A specialist can examine features that are difficult to see in a photograph, including perforation measurements, gum condition, printing characteristics, and possible varieties. Another important point for collectors is that online asking prices are not the same as confirmed selling prices. Someone can list a stamp for a very high price, but that does not mean the stamp will actually sell for that amount. When researching market value, look for reputable auction results, recognized catalog information, and comparable examples in similar condition. The stamp shown in this video is therefore a great example of why identification comes before valuation. It may look like one of the famous World War II Minuteman stamps, but the wording tells us something different. This is the later 25-cent savings stamp, Scott S6, in dark blue and carmine, associated with 1958, and even if your individual stamp turns out to have only modest monetary value, it still has historical importance. It represents an era when the United States used savings stamps to encourage citizens to save and participate in government savings programs. The Minuteman and American flag make the patriotic message impossible to miss. So, if you find one of these stamps inside an old family album, don't immediately throw it into a box with ordinary postage stamps. Take a closer look. Check the wording, color, perforations, gum, centering, and whether it is part of a booklet or block. If you notice a major printing or perforation error, that's when the stamp becomes especially interesting. And remember, The biggest mistake a collector can make is assuming that every old stamp with a famous design is automatically rare. The real secret is in the details. Correct identification, condition, variety, and actual market demand are what determine collector interest. Next up, we have another fascinating stamp to explore. In average condition may have relatively modest collector value. Current marketplace listings show individual WS8 stamps being offered for amounts in the low dollar range, while specialized materials such as booklet panes and plate blocks can command more. These asking prices should be treated only as indicators, because the actual amount a buyer pays can be very different. This is an important lesson for anyone watching videos about rare stamps. You should never see an online listing for a high price and immediately assume your own stamp is worth the same amount. Asking prices are not confirmed sales. A realistic valuation should consider completed auction results, recognized catalogs, condition, and the exact variety of the stamp. One of the most important things to inspect is the condition. Look carefully at the perforations around the edges. Are all the teeth intact? Are there any tears, cuts, missing perforations, creases, or thin areas? A stamp with serious damage can be worth considerably less than a fresh and well-preserved example. Next, examine the centering. Is the design positioned evenly between the perforations? A well-centered stamp generally has a much more attractive appearance. Collectors often pay close attention to centering when comparing stamps of similar quality. If the stamp is unused, the gum on the back is also important. Original gum that remains in good condition can increase collector interest. However, this is where you need to be extremely careful. Never try to regum, wash, press, trim, or chemically clean an old stamp yourself. Amateur alterations can destroy much of the collector value. You should also check whether your stamp is actually a single WS8 or whether it is still attached to other stamps. If you find 10 of these stamps together in their original booklet pane format, you may have the WS8B variety rather than an ordinary single WS8. That distinction can be important. The National Postal Museum specifically records WS8B as the booklet or booklet pane variety. Another fascinating area is plate blocks. During the printing process, sheets carried plate numbers in the margins. Specialists collect these plate number combinations because they provide information about how the stamps were produced. The National Postal Museum records numerous plate numbers associated with WS8, making plate material an interesting area for specialized collectors. The historical purpose of the stamp makes it even more interesting. During World War II, the United States needed enormous financial resources. The government encouraged citizens to purchase war bonds and other savings products. War savings stamps gave people a way to save smaller amounts and participate in this effort. The program also helped make the war effort feel personal. A child who bought a 25-cent stamp might not have been able to purchase a large bond, but that child could still participate. A family could save together. Workers could purchase stamps regularly. Communities could encourage people to contribute. In this way, a tiny stamp became part of a much larger national campaign. Imagine holding this exact design in 1942. The United States was entering one of the most important and difficult periods in its history. Americans were seeing news of the war, families were being separated, factories were producing military equipment, and citizens on the home front were being asked to contribute in many different ways. This little 25-cent stamp was one small part of that enormous effort. That is what makes stamp collecting so fascinating. The value of a stamp is not always measured in dollars. Sometimes the historical story behind the stamp is just as important as its market price. A 25-cent war savings stamp can connect today's collector directly with the American home front during World War II. Now, if you have one of these stamps in your collection, there are several things you should check before searching for a value online. First, confirm that the stamp actually says United States and war savings. Second, check that the denomination is 25 cents. Third, compare the color with the dark blue-green description associated with WS8. Fourth, inspect the perforations and centering. Fifth, examine the back for gum condition if it is unused. Finally, determine whether it is a single stamp, a booklet pane, or part of a larger block. These small details can make a major difference in identification, and there is another important warning. Do not assume that every Minuteman stamp is the same. There are multiple U.S. savings stamp issues using similar Minuteman imagery. Some later issues use different wording, dates, colors, and catalog numbers. The difference between war savings and savings stamp can be especially important when identifying these issues. For example, a later 25-cent savings stamp can look very similar to this stamp, but it belongs to a different series. So always read the wording carefully instead of identifying the stamp simply by its picture. The exact condition of the stamp shown in a photograph can also be difficult to determine. A high-resolution photograph can help with basic identification, but it cannot always reveal gum disturbances, hidden thins, paper characteristics, or other details that a professional collector or expert may inspect in person. That means the safest approach is to identify the stamp first and value it second if your WS8 is a normal single in average condition. Don't be disappointed if it does not turn out to be a huge money rarity. Many collectible stamps are valuable because of their history rather than because they sell for thousands of dollars. On the other hand, if you discover a booklet pane, plate block, major error, or an exceptionally well-preserved unused example, it may deserve a much closer examination. There is evidence that specialized WS8 material can attract collector interest. Auction records include groups and unexploded booklet material containing WS8 stamps, showing that collectors do pay attention to these formats and varieties. The most important thing is not to alter the stamp before you know what you have. Keep it dry, protect it from sunlight, avoid unnecessary handling, and store it in proper archival stamp material. If you believe it may be an unusual variety or valuable example, consider getting an opinion from a reputable stamp dealer or professional expert. So, what have we discovered today? The stamp shown here is the 1942 United States 25-cent war savings stamp, Scott WS8, printed in dark blue-green. It features the famous Minuteman and was part of America's World War II savings program. It was designed not simply as a postage stamp, but as a way for ordinary Americans to participate in the nation's wartime savings effort. The series also included booklet and other specialized formats, giving collectors several different varieties to study. Its modern collector value depends on exactly what you have. A common single stamp may have modest value, while a booklet pane, plate block, error, or exceptional quality example can be more desirable. So don't judge this stamp by its 25-cent denomination alone, and remember, the real secret of stamp collecting is in the details. The color, perforations, gum, centering, printing, plate numbers, and format can all tell you something about the stamp in your hands. If you have one of these 25-cent or savings stamps sitting inside an old album, family collection, envelope, or savings booklet, take another look at it. You may not have $1 million stamp, but you could have a fascinating piece of American history that deserves to be preserved and properly identified. Thank you for watching Stamp Us, where every stamp has a story and every detail matters. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Stamp Us, and turn on notifications for more fascinating United States stamps, historical collectibles, rare varieties, and collector value discoveries. Keep searching through those old collections. Keep learning about American philately, and never overlook a tiny piece of paper just because it looks ordinary. Sometimes the smallest objects can carry the biggest stories. This is Stamp Us. Thanks for watching, keep collecting, and I'll see you in the next video.